Hello, friends. Good morning, happy Friday, and welcome back to another episode of Elaborations with E. I'm your host, Ava, and I am here to be your best friend and your guide on your spiritual journey. And here on this podcast, we slow things down a little bit and talk about real life, reflection, healing, growth, and the kinds of conversations that sit right at the intersection of intention and everyday living. So wherever you are listening from today, I am really glad that you are here and that you chose to tune into the podcast today. Your energy and your presence means a lot to me, and I really hope that you enjoy today's episode. So, here's the deal. I have been pondering on something that sits at that sweet little crossroads between spirituality and real life. But before I talk to you about the topic that I want to present to you today, I want to say this. Manifestation conversations are happening everywhere right now. You can open YouTube and type in manifestation into the search bar, and you will find several results and several creators talking about manifestation tools, tricks, and routines, and suggesting all of the different ways that you can attract the life that you want. From meditations to visualization techniques to journaling and scripting techniques and so much more. You can even go on TikTok and search hashtag spiritual talk and find some of the same. You'll see people explaining manifestation from every possible angle, including using witchcraft for manifestation. And I myself, being a witch, I do believe that witchcraft is itself a form of manifestation energy magic. But we can talk about that in another episode, because today I really want to talk to you about how some of this information can be really helpful, but a lot of these conversations stay on the surface, especially when it comes to talking about manifesting money and the actual cost of the life that you desire to live. From the physical cost to the spiritual cost and, of course, the financial. Because modern day spirituality conversations and conversations around manifestation don't always start with talking about participation. And that is the conversation that I want to have with you today. Because manifestation isn't just about belief alone. It isn't just about your thoughts and feeling things real and leaning into the Neville Goddard idea of feeling is the secret, which is one of my favorite ideas, and I love Neville Goddard. But participation is also key. But interestingly enough, this conversation is far from new. Going back to Neville Goddard, people such as Neville, Napoleon Hill, Wallace D, Wattles, Florence Scovel Shinn, Joseph Murphy, and so many others have been speaking on these ideas for more than a century. And even newer authors and thought provokers such as Eckhart Tolle and Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is a neuroscientist, and even my current favorite, Jen Sincero, especially in her book, You Are a Badass at Making Money, have brought these ideas into a much more modern conversation over the past couple of decades. And one thing that Jen talks about specifically early on in her book is something called allowance. Now, when I say the word allowance, you might be thinking of someone giving someone a set amount of money for doing something, such as when you're giving a kid $50 at the end of the week because they did their chores, they did their homework, they were a good kid this week, now they get $50 to go to the mall with their friends. That is what we think of when we think of allowance. But I want to give you another perspective on that word, because allowance is more than just giving somebody money and calling it a day. Allowance is the sense of giving yourself permission to want what you actually want and to participate in creating that life that you desire. And that is where I want to start today's conversation. So buckle up, Get ready, because I'm taking you on a ride. So let's first talk about the quiet misunderstanding about manifestation. In most manifestation conversations today, you will hear that manifestation starts with your belief and your thoughts. Your belief and thoughts about yourself, your belief and thoughts about the thing that you desire to manifest in your life, and also your feelings. But in reality, it often begins with giving yourself permission. And that ties into the feeling aspect of it, because when we start visualizing and we start taking that permission to want something different, we begin to imagine a life that might look bigger, freer, or more joyful than what you were taught to expect and what you are taught to want. Because, excuse me, sorry, I had a little something caught in my throat, but we are often told not to give ourselves that permission in lieu of being grateful for what we already have. But the attitude of gratitude is meant to propel us to forward expansion and to bring in more things to be grateful for. Because when we are acting out of an attitude of gratitude, we align ourselves with more opportunities to be grateful for more things and more experiences and more relationships and more adventure in our lives. And in the first chapter of You Are a Badass at Making Money, Jen wrote something that really stuck with me. She said, "People love to tell you what you should and shouldn't want. And if we listen long enough, we start telling ourselves what we shouldn't want, regardless of how we feel deep down." And this jumped out at me so much that when I read this line, I decided to highlight it and write a note in the margin of my own copy of the book. And normally I don't highlight books and I don't deface books and write in the margins, but when it comes to self-help books or books that you can use for study, I'm a little more lenient. But this line made me realize something. A lot of us become so conditioned to pleasing other people or to believing in the same ideas that they have passed down to us that we quietly abandon our own desires. We do what seems reasonable, we do what's expected, and we do what keeps others comfortable. But we don't always give ourselves permission to want what we actually want and what actually feels good or exciting or aligned with who we want to be. And manifestation conversations rarely start there in that little sphere, but they probably should. Because when you don't allow yourself to want something, you're going to hold yourself back from ever participating in creating the desired life that you want. You're going to hold yourself back and you're never going to participate in the life that you're creating. You're going to be a side character in your own story. And that brings me to the money story that we inherit. Jen talks about how many of us grow up with very strong stories about money. Stories that sound like facts and truths, but are really just beliefs that we absorbed over time. Things like, money is the root of all evil, rich people are greedy, wanting money makes you shallow, and you have to be rich in order to be able to do XYZ thing. And just like her example in her book where she says that she was so attached to kind of living her life the way that she was living it, and she was so attached to those preconceived notions around money that she thought were her truths, which were really conditioned beliefs that we come to find out later on in the book. She was so attached to these truths, and she was just as attached to these truths as she was to stop buying groceries at the dollar store. And she became so attached to these beliefs that she was pretty much attaching herself to being poor. She was comfortable just staying in this lifestyle where she was living in this tiny space where her kitchen was her bedroom and her bathroom was literally like a closet. And we can get so attached to those beliefs that we will keep ourselves stuck in certain positions. But when we hear these ideas often enough, they start to shape the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see opportunities. Because just like Jen, we'll crave freedom, we'll crave creative independence, we'll crave the ability to travel or explore, to even go someplace as simple as Disney World. And I say simple because that's a place that a lot of people travel to year after year after year. So it is a very easy destination that'll pop up into our heads that it's just like, yeah, I want to go to Disney World. But part of us believes that money is bad. And if that part of you believes that money itself is bad, you'll unconsciously distance yourself from it, which creates contradiction and resistance. Because the life you want, the life that you desire, the life that you picture yourself living, where you're able to go have brunch with your friends on a Sunday and take your kids to Disney Friday through the next Tuesday, requires resources. But the beliefs you inherited might be telling you that those resources are somehow wrong. And that tension can quietly keep you stuck for years on end before you do something about it. And that brings me to the pedestal problem and the opposite of the pedestal problem, which is the dirt problem. I'm going to call it the dirt problem, where we kick something into the dirt because we say it's bad, we don't want it, we shouldn't want it, bye-bye. One of the most powerful observations that Jen makes in her first chapter of the book is this. One of the biggest obstacles to making lots of money is not a lack of good ideas or opportunities. It's that we refuse to give ourselves permission to become rich, and thus we refuse those ideas and opportunities. We say, we can't do it. We say, somebody else already did it. They already did it better. We shouldn't even try. And that idea opens up a really important conversation. Because many people don't struggle with money itself. They struggle because they have a complicated emotional relationship with it. Sometimes we demonize money and we say, you see that? You shouldn't want it. You shouldn't want it because it's going to make you greedy. You shouldn't want it because it's going to make you a bad person. You shouldn't want it because if you're rich, then you're just like the 1% of people who have all of the money in the world, and you're going to treat people like shit. And that is the belief that we hear. And then sometimes we put it on a pedestal and we say, money and gold and being able to live in this nice house and have fancy cars, and I want that. Somebody please give it to me. Somebody love me enough to give this to me. Hey, you, person who has money in your pocket, help me get this, and we become very loud in the fact that we're like pining over money as if we would pine over somebody that we want to love us, right? But both of these dynamics create distance, resistance, tension, and they remove us from being able to actually manifest the money that we desire so that we can live the life that we desire. And when we put something on a pedestal, whether it's money, success, or even another person, it becomes larger than life versus what we believe about ourselves. It becomes unreachable. It becomes almost mythical. And when we treat something like a villain, it stays distant. And when we treat it like an untouchable prize, it also stays distant. But when we start seeing money and anything else that we desire as something more neutral, something that is an energetic frequency before it is even a currency or a tangible thing that you can hold in your hand, and we start to see it as a resource, a tool, and a form of exchange that we are more equal to than we are unequal to it. The relationship becomes much healthier, much more vibrant, much more rich, and it becomes more beautiful. And we're able to actually align ourselves with the money that is needed to actually put into the life that we desire. Allow me to give you a small example from my own life right now. Nothing dramatic, just something truly practical. I have an iPhone 11 Pro and an iPad 10. And I got both of these things 6 years ago when I was starting grad school. I ultimately stopped going for my master's degree in English literature because I was going through a transitional period in my life, and part of that transitional period I was dealing with a lot of depression, and I lost my spark and I had to find it again. But that's not the story that I'm trying to make. The story that I'm trying to tell is that these devices are brilliant devices, and I love my iPhone and I love my iPad. But they've done exactly what I've needed them to do for such a long time. But at the end of the day, technology has a lifespan. It doesn't matter if it's an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy. It doesn't matter if it's an iPad or a MacBook or an HP laptop, like an Omnibook. It doesn't matter if it's a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. Technology has a lifespan, and eventually the devices that you're using stop receiving updates, apps stop working the way that they should, and something that worked perfectly fine yesterday doesn't really support what you're trying to build anymore. So I've started recently thinking about upgrading my tech. But sometimes when I've mentioned it to the people in my life, the response is something like this: well, why upgrade it if it still works? Or isn't it going to be kind of expensive to upgrade it? And yes, I'm slipping into that little Valley Girl accent because, it's like, sometimes when you hear certain accents, they sound a little condescending, right? And that's how I was feeling. I was feeling like people were condescending to me when I was telling them that I'm going to upgrade my tech. But the way I see tech upgrades and life upgrades is very different from some of the people in my life. I'm not looking at new technology like some shiny new object that's going to magically change my life like the snap of a finger. I'm looking at upgrading my technology to be able to get myself better tools that will better support the work that I'm building, tools that will help me create things more seamlessly and easily, tools that will allow me to keep doing what I'm already doing, just more efficiently. So instead of stressing about it or trying to force the situation, I'm approaching it from a conscious place because I know roughly what I want. And I know that eventually I will need to upgrade, otherwise I'm not going to have any devices to use, right? But I am allowing myself to align with the resources that will make it possible by not obsessing over it, by not pretending that I don't want it, but by simply acknowledging the desire and allowing the path toward it to unfold naturally. And that is a much healthier relationship with both money and desire than either pretending that you don't want something or believing that you can't have it just because maybe at this current present moment you don't have the resources for it. Okay? And that brings me to section 4, desire without shame. I want to go on record, not as the first person to say this, but as one of the many people who will say this. It is okay to want things. Doesn't matter if that thing is a cheeseburger from McDonald's or it's a Lamborghini. It is okay to want experience and to want more experience. It doesn't matter if that experience is going to see a live show at a local theater, or it is going to New York to see Wicked on Broadway, on actual Broadway. It is okay to imagine yourself living a life that includes joy, travel, creativity, or freedom. And it doesn't matter if that looks like one day having brunch with your friends, like I think I said earlier, and then the next day going to Disney World, or going to London and Edinburgh and going on a trip of like seeing the United Kingdom and Great Britain, and then the next day coming home and talking about it. Or not the next day, not literally the next day, but you know what I mean. It is okay to imagine yourself living that life, because life isn't meant to exist only at the bare minimum level of survival. Because yes, there is the baseline. There is the baseline of manifesting money to be able to make sure the bills are paid and the responsibilities of everyday life are taken care of, so that you have clean clothes, a bed to sleep in, a roof over your head, clean and nutritious food. But there is also expansion and curiosity and exploration. And allowing yourself to want those things doesn't mean that you are taking something away from someone else. Just because you're out here trying to manifest your yearly income becoming your monthly income doesn't mean that you're taking away resources from Joe Blow over here, who's working as a teacher and wants more for his life. Okay? You're not. Because money is an energy, it's a vibration before it even is a currency. And when we tap into that energetic vibration and align ourselves with it as equals, we acknowledge the life that we want to participate in and the energy that is required to make it happen. And we're not taking away anything from anyone. We're simply attuning ourselves to the frequency that is going to help us get to where we want to be. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to align ourselves with the resources to be able to help Joe go from being a teacher who's still living paycheck to paycheck to being a teacher who can actually afford different things because we might have helped them out. Who knows? And that brings me to the idea of desire versus obsession. Because there is an important difference between desire and desperation. Desire says, that would be beautiful. I'd love to experience that. Whereas desperation says, I will never be happy unless I have this. And that difference matters so exponentially. Because desire is going to keep you open. It's going to align you with new opportunities. It's going to align you with new experiences, whether it's new opportunities for new jobs or new opportunities for new networking paths or new opportunities to go somewhere you've never been before. But desperation places something on a pedestal and it removes you from that thing, that person, that opportunity, that whatever it is. And manifestation tends to respond much more easily to openness than to obsession. So imagining yourself living a life that you would enjoy and visualizing the experiences that you would love to have and seeing yourself using those tools and resources that support your growth is not unhealthy. That is imagination working with intention. And imagination has always been the first step in creating something new. Okay? But I want to give you a little funny little quip about desire versus desperation. So, I am going to talk about it. All right. I was going to not talk about it, but I am going to talk about it. So, let's look at desire versus desperation from this little point of view. We all know that there are several different shows out there circulating right now that have become really popular. From Rings of Power on Amazon Prime to Bridgerton and Stranger Things on Netflix. And we may look at those actors and actresses in these shows and we may want to meet them at conventions and we may imagine ourselves meeting them. We may imagine ourselves talking to them. We may imagine ourselves, being in a room with them. We may imagine ourselves in different scenarios with them. And Sometimes, yes, we may imagine ourselves in not safe for work scenarios. And one such actor who has received very amazing critical acclaim right now is none other than Jamie Campbell Bower. He got his first acting break as Anthony Hope in Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, the Tim Burton film adaptation of the musical of the same name that came out in 2007. It came out in Christmas of 2007. And I remember this intrinsically because I remember going to the theaters and seeing movie posters and different things like that and knowing friends who had seen the movie. And then my mom recorded it on DVR when we had DVR in our apartment. And, she saw it before I did. But I was 13 years old when that movie came out. I am aging myself right now. But I remember also seeing the movie and loving it. I remember loving it because my mom and I were really big Tim Burton fans, and I was a big Tim Burton fan growing up. I've watched everything from Beetlejuice to Nightmare Before Christmas to Corpse Bride to Edward Scissorhands and so many others. I've even seen both versions of Frankenweenie, and I loved both of them. And the original version of Frankenweenie came out in the 80s, and it was live action, and it had the little boy that played Bastian in the Neverending Story as the little boy that created the Frankenweenie dog. Okay? So I highly recommend you try to find that somewhere and watch it. It's fantastic. But anyway, I remember really loving Sweeney Todd. I remember really loving the movie. And I remember loving the movie so much that I would watch it on repeat because I loved singing along with the songs. And I pictured myself as Mrs. Lovett, and I dressed up as Mrs. Lovett the year after. Like, I did. I dressed up as Mrs. Lovett for Halloween the year after because I finally got to see the movie when I was like, almost 14 years old. And then I dressed up as Mrs. Lovett for Halloween. And I remember a couple of years later really getting into Twilight. And then when I saw Twilight, I had to do a double take because I was just like, wait a minute, hang on. Because they brought into the second film, into New Moon, they brought in the Volturi, which are that group of vampire elitists, let's just say. They are a group of vampire elitists. They're like one of the oldest clans of vampires, and they're still living in Italy. And God, I love Michael Sheen as Aro. He was great. I love Michael Sheen. Anyway, but I remember watching these films and having to do a double take because not only was I seeing Michael Sheen as Aro and remembering Michael Sheen from Underworld as the head Lycan, and then seeing Dakota Fanning as a vampire, which was really cool. I love Dakota Fanning. But then I also saw Jamie. And I was like, hang on a clock tick. Is that Jamie Campbell Bower? The same Jamie Campbell Bower that played Anthony Hope in Sweeney Todd? And sure enough, it definitely was. And I remember seeing that, and I was just like, oh my gosh. Recognition much. And then, of course, after that, he went on to be in The Mortal Instruments. And now he's famous for playing a literal villain in a science fiction horror show on Netflix called Stranger Things. And people are nuts over it. People have been going nuts over Vecna, otherwise known as Henry Creel, otherwise known as Experiment 001. And people are nuts. People are nuts for him. People are nuts for Jamie. And there is a difference between, say, desiring to meet him, going to a Comic-Con and, maybe getting his autograph, talking to him for a few minutes, and, just kind of getting to know him versus people ogling over him and, basically calling him daddy and saying that he threw his Vecna-C everywhere and all of this different stuff that can honestly make people uncomfortable. But when you have people who are in the limelight they often receive that type of attention. They get put up on a pedestal, and people start, just absolutely losing their shit over everything that they do. Versus being like, oh my gosh, congratulations, Jamie, you've had an amazing career thus far. And he also has music projects. Go check him out. If you're really that obsessed with the guy, which I hate to say this to any of y'all who are listening, but like, if you're really that obsessed with the guy, go check out his music projects, okay? I'm not going to feed into your obsession. Please don't be obsessed. Please leave the guy alone, but like, at the same time, go check out his music. Go support him as a creator. Go support him as a creator. Absolutely. But bottom line, I'm using him as a, new world kind of example. Not new world, but as a modern day example of obsession, of becoming obsessed with celebrity, becoming obsessed with someone that we find perhaps attractive, and really like putting him on a pedestal. Because if you're putting, a person on a pedestal, you're removing yourselves from them, and they will always see you as none other than some crazed fan. Versus if you were to walk into a convention that had all of your favorite actors, and Jamie just so happened to be there. Don't treat him any differently than if you were to walk up to Robert Englund, who is the original Freddy Krueger, and you were to be like, dude, I've loved Nightmare on Elm Street. Congratulations. Your work is amazing. It was really cool seeing you have like that little cameo in Stranger Things, because he did in season 4. He was Victor Creel. Spoiler alert. But, like, don't treat one celebrity any different than you would another celebrity. If you're going to treat people differently than you just because they are famous for what? Being creative, getting noticed for their creative talents. But yeah. Don't put someone on a pedestal. Don't put money on a pedestal. Don't put anything onto the pedestal. I am tripping over here. But don't put anything so far up on this pedestal that you remove it from yourself and you no longer see it as an equal. Because then you put yourself in a position to always be less than whatever it is that you desire, whatever it is that you admire even. And that is where you trip yourself up. And I just wanted to use that as a little funny anecdote, little funny example, semi-funny, but to give you a bottom line of like just how harmful that putting something on a pedestal can be. Okay? So, what have we learned? Don't put it on the pedestal. Don't put Jamie Campbell Bower on a pedestal. Please don't. I will personally get the whooping on you. But yeah. Anyway. To close out this episode and move away from that little tangent, albeit kind of funny, you don't need to have every step of your manifestation process figured out. You don't need a perfect plan to manifest the money, the person, the trips, the job, the new car, the new house, the anything. You don't have to have this perfect blueprint. You don't even have to have a vision board that you see every day as soon as you wake up in the morning. It can help, but you don't need it. But at some point, you do have to stop pretending that the cost of the life that you want doesn't exist. Clarity is kind and structure is supportive. And wanting more from your life means being willing to meet yourself there. Being willing to set up your future self for that. Being willing to participate in the creation of your highest desired life. And when belief, action, and patience begin moving together, things start unfolding in ways that feel less forced and start to feel a lot more natural. Thank you, as always, for spending this time with me and for even listening to my little Jamie Campbell Bower rant. And as always, if this episode resonated with you, the best way to stay connected with me right now is on Instagram, and you can find me at elaborations.with.e. I am still moving through some updates over there, so things may be unfolding slowly, but they are still unfolding. And you can also subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even watch it on YouTube, wherever you prefer to listen. And if you feel called, please share this episode with someone who might need it, or post it to your Instagram stories and tag me, because I would love to hear what your takeaways were, and I am always open to deeper conversations. I love being able to expand. I love being able to be expanded, and I love being able to just talk a little bit more outside of just hopping on the mic. This has been another enlightening episode of Elaborations with E. I hope you have a fantastic Friday and a fantastic weekend. And take care of yourself and move with intention. And I will see you again in the next episode. Bye.